All right, Karen, whenever you're ready.
All right, we're on?
Yep.
Okay, great. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Town of Peterborough's report out on racial justice and policing. This is a follow-up meeting to our listening session held on June 23rd. And with me tonight are Chief Scott Guinard from the Peterborough Police Department, Chief Ed Walker from Peterborough Fire and Rescue, Selectman Tyler Ward. I think Bill is listening in, Bill Taylor, and Nicole McStay is our support guru, facilitator, and we also have Fosh, who's helping us with the technology tonight. Thank you all for being here, and thanks to our community for being here. Nicole, are you going to admit people as they come?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. Lovely. All right. So, welcome. I'm Karen Hatcher. I'm a select woman in town, and tonight I'm serving in my role as Community and Economic Development Coordinator as part of the team that worked on the response. We will be covering logistics in a minute. Nicole will go over that. I will give a little overview of the agenda, and then we will launch into the presentation. There will be ample time at the end tonight for questions and answers. We've left a lot of time for that. So if you would please save your questions, write them down. We're all going to be here and we will answer them. Okay, so Nicole, do you want to cover logistics and participation?
Sure. Real briefly. As people join the Zoom meeting, they're going to come into a waiting room. As I see them in the waiting room, I'll admit them into the Zoom. Everyone will be automatically muted when they come in. When we come to the question and answer portion of the meeting tonight, I'll ask you to please raise your hand. There's a little raise your hand tool that you can click on if you go to participants window. It's pretty self-explanatory. Just click on that button. I'll be able to see your hand raised, and at that point I'll click on you, I'll announce your name and unmute you. Had a few problems the last time with the unmuting function. It's sometimes a little slow to respond, so just wait a moment before clicking yourself, or I might ask you to check to make sure that you're unmuted. Other than that, it's really pretty self-explanatory. You shouldn't have any trouble with the raise your hand function. I'll go through. I won't be taking repeat speakers until we're certain that we've gotten through everybody. There's a lot of people joining the meeting. We've got 34 participants right now. So looks like we're going to have a good group.
Okay, great. All right, so we're going to get started. I'm going to share my screen and we'll okay. Y'all see that? Hopefully.
Yep.
Okay, great. Right. I need to. Good. So as we discussed, we're going to provide to you a report out of what we heard 2 weeks ago. And what I can tell you is that we have spent a good amount of time really talking about discussing what we heard. And tonight what we plan to present to you is a summary of what we heard, and then we will also be talking about some action steps we can take that we'd like to take, and some ways that the community can be involved in that. After I initially get us started, Chief Guinard is going to speak to some of the issues that were raised last call, and we'll move through. So with no further ado, let me get us going. So first, let's start with where are we? For the last 6 weeks, we have been seeing protests, rallies, and vigils, Black Lives Matter and racial justice, and that locally spurred a letter from community members asking for transparency here in Peterborough. That led us to a listening session on June 23rd, where we had about 70 people attend that Zoom meeting, and many other people watch on Facebook and on the recording. We've spent then the last 2 weeks processing what we heard, and tonight we will be proposing actions to address what we heard. And that brings us to the report out. So in the processing what we heard, we're going to hear from Chief Gennard, and what I'm going to do is stop my share and let us go right to Chief and give him an opportunity to respond to some of the things he heard and let us know what he's been working on.
Thank you, Karen. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Since the June 23rd community listening session, there's been much discussion amongst the other police department employees and me regarding the listening session. They've taken the opportunity to view the listening session, and please know that it's been difficult for them too. I feel that it's important for you to know that we recognize the fact that on occasion, our actions may result in unattended consequences. That is how we are perceived. There may be times when the conduct of an officer, although perfectly legitimate, may be perceived by a civilian witness as inappropriate. This is especially true today for the police officers that are on the street. Something that was said to me back in 1985 that I first started, I continuously repeat to new recruits here. I remind them that officers must think of themselves as a fish in a fishbowl, and the entire world is looking in on them. One of the things we heard on the 23rd were citizen complaints, and do we have a process in place for that? The fact is, yes, we do have a policy on how to handle citizen complaints and a process for that. If people feel they need to make a complaint about how they were handled by a police officer, they basically have three options right now. They can either call or stop by and speak to a supervisor. Oftentimes an explanation of what took place will clear up any confusion. They can either call or stop by and speak to me personally. If somebody does not feel comfortable with that, then I recommend that they talk to the town administrator or deputy town administrator. So those are the three options that they have in place right now for addressing concerns or complaints that a resident may have. Training was also brought up. This is a question I've been asked a lot over the past 2 or 3 weeks. Specifically, how much and what type of training do officers receive on racism? Quite frankly, the answer is very little. 95% of our training is taught at the New Hampshire Police Academy. They touch base on racism and ethnic relations within the first 2 to 3 weeks, but it's a very short time window there of opportunity on that type of training. The governor's recently established Commission on Law Enforcement, Accountability, Community, and Transparency is addressing the need for more and better training on racism and other related topics to all New Hampshire law enforcement and on a continued basis. That report will be submitted to the governor by that commission 45 days after the onset of that commission, which was approximately 2 to 3 weeks ago. In the meantime, however, we have a Peterborough resident who actually spoke at the 23rd session, who has reached out to me and provided me with training in the private sector called Community Conscious Policing. And once I read through the data in the background of the gentleman that teaches it, Mr. Brandon Lee, it looks like very impressive training. Moving forward, we do intend to pursue more training in the private sector as well as the state sector at the police academy. The budget was also brought up, and transparency about spending. One of the things that I'm currently working on is breaking down our operating budget line item by line item so that residents will have an opportunity to see just how much we spend and specifically for what purpose. So I hope to be producing those documents soon as well. Police activity was brought up. As of today, I submitted to Karen Hatcher 10 years of data on traffic stops and arrests as they relate to race, gender, and age. So we've made progress there, and that information will be posted soon in working with the group here. Because of the fact that our calls for service are not cataloged by mental health, addiction, neighbor dispute, or other minor public safety issues, putting that data together is going to require somebody sitting down and reading through thousands of narratives that officers have typed up at the end of a call. But we will progress there. But again, that's going to take some time. And I think it's important for people to understand, and I don't mean to try to make excuses here, but we do not have a records division. I don't have a secretary or administrative assistant. So a lot of this work I'm having to do on my own when time permits. So bear with us on the timeliness of delivering this information. Several other initiatives are also being planned, which Karen will speak about here next. And lastly, I'd like to take the opportunity to sincerely thank our supporters. Your kind words and generosity have gone a long way to help keep morale up within the police department. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. All right. And if you have questions for Chief, just save them. We're going to come back to that. I'm just going to resume where we were. All righty. Let me see. Karen, there you are. Okay. So now what I'd like to do is see if my screen's going to work. Let's try that. Sorry. Hold on one second. There we go. So in talking about what we heard, there really were 4 themes that emerged in the conversation on the 23rd. One had to do with transparency, another with connection, another with education and engagement, and a last one with response. And so we're going to take each one of these and define it and kind of look to the main points of each one, and then we're going to talk about some action steps that we believe we can take. First, let's look at transparency. You asked us, how are officers screened, hired, trained, equipped, supervised? How do we handle officer complaints, which Chief just talked about? How has the town responded to complaints? So as we look at activities, this is kind of the frame through which we'll look at transparency. When we look at connection, we're looking at the questions of how we can build a more positive relationship with the members of the police department, how our community can be involved in hiring new recruits, and how we can create more opportunities for connection between the police department and the greater community. When we look at education and engagement, we heard you say there was need for more conversation, and there was a need for educating the community on this issue. And also we heard that our schools need to improve their curriculum. So those are the 3 main ideas that came out of that piece. And lastly, with response, some of the questions that were posed had to do with what is our current system of response? And currently, what do we expect our officers and responders to do when they're called for assistance? What's the wide range of things they get called for? And then what resources exist that could improve the current system? So that's kind of the frame and the way we've defined what we heard. And now what I'll do is just take you through some of the action steps that we believe we can take. So as far as improving transparency, we began tonight with Chief answering some of the key questions that came up in the listening session. But we also want to take that further and post answers to the questions that are being asked in an article that we'll submit to the paper and also put on our town website, so that there's full transparency. Chief is answering the questions that have been posed, and we are sharing that information widely. Another step we can take there is to put an FAQ on the new PPD web page. And as you may know, the town is currently very close to launching a new website. There's still some work to be done, but when we do that, the new page for the police department will have the FAQ listed. The third idea has to do with creating a police community relations board, which would meet monthly to discuss issues and solutions. And this would be made up of police officers and community members. And the last idea which Chief put forward was to include members of our community in the interview process when hiring new police officers. So these are 4 steps that we believe we can take pretty readily to get started. As for strengthening connection, the action items we can take. The first thing we believe we can do right away is to begin to post photos and bios of the officers of both the police department and Peterborough Fire and Rescue on their Facebook pages, and then as the new website is ready, on the website. So this will give members of our community faces and names and an ability to know who's serving the community on those departments. The second idea we have is to host a community event, obviously appropriately socially distanced, but something like a barbecue in the park where members of the police department and fire department will barbecue for the community. Maybe it's a potluck, but something later this summer that is a community builder and that can get us to know each other a little bit better. The third idea is to reinstitute foot or bike patrols in the downtown areas, making the officers more approachable and accessible. And Chief tells me that we have 2 bicycles that can be put back into service. So he can say more about that later if he'd like. And the last idea is to host a regular event series, something like Ask an Officer, which would be small group gatherings where community members would have an opportunity to have a conversation with an individual officer and a chance to ask about anything you want to ask, like what's the most frustrating part of your job, for example, or what's your favorite ice cream? But a way to become more human to each other and a way to build relationship, to create the connection. As far as community education and engagement goes, this is something where we are very excited to have had the Peterborough Town Library staff step up and offer their assistance. And I'm wondering, Corinne, if you want to speak to this. I know you're on the call, and maybe you could unmute and talk about what the library is seeing as a way to participate in this.
Sure. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I could see Nicole only. Yeah, I've prepared something to say. It's going to take me a little less than 5 minutes, but it is a little bit, so I'll just jump in. So I'm Corinne Chronopoulos, I'm the library director, and I attended the last listening session. And what I heard from people of color was that they don't feel safe in our community, and that it's not just about how this intersects with policing, but it's also about our community as a whole. And we have the responsibility to actively move forward from this moment and commit to becoming an anti-racist community. How's my internet? It's still coming through?
You're breaking up a little bit.
Okay.
Maybe you could just take the video part.
Yeah.
I just stopped your video, Corinne, so.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'll keep going. Okay.
Yes.
So Nicole, I can see you, so just stop me if I'm not coming through.
Yeah, you're breaking up.
Yeah.
So
You're breaking up,
to
Corinne.
be anti-racist means to fight against racism. And racism, we're talking about racism, and that does a part of our community. Okay. All right, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna copy and paste what I was gonna say and put it in the chat, and you can all read it.
Perfect.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks, Corinne. Sorry that didn't work. But to say that the library welcomes ideas and feedback, and they have posted their library at peterborough.nh.gov email address here. And so read her comments, comment on her comments, and thank you, Corinne and the library, for taking on this piece of the continuing conversation about this issue in our community. And then lastly, now I'm going to see if I can get my computer to go. All right, hang on a second. There we go. As we look at improving response in our community, the action items that we are putting forward tonight, the first one is to schedule a conversation on community response, where Chief Guinard and Chief Walker and other community partners who are key to responding to community needs and crises could be with us to talk about the current system of response. Because if we're going to make changes to how we respond to community needs, we first need to understand what the system is and how it works in our community. And I personally, when both chiefs spoke with me about what happens when a call comes in, I was surprised at how much coordination already goes on that I didn't know about. So I thought that would be a first step that we would want to take. And following that then, we would embark on a public community stakeholder-based approach. And by that, what I mean is a group of those representatives from those organizations that do have a role to play in addictions and mental health and domestic violence and homelessness and those kinds of things that are kind of first line response to community needs, to bring those folks together to explore, realign, and optimize services that we might discover in that first conversation should be aligned, realigned, or optimized. And that would be like second step. And then a third idea, which came to us from another community, is that we could look at initiating a volunteer citizens conflict mediation training, which would provide mediation services between community members for some of those things that our police officers get called out to mediate that perhaps don't really need an officer to mediate, you know, if you've got a neighbor to neighbor kind of situation. So that was something that is also an idea put forward. So that constitutes the thinking over the last 2 weeks that we wanted to share with you tonight. But what I want to next say to the community, all of you, is we need your help. I think Chief alluded to the fact that we are a small community, but we are a deeply passionate community and a deeply engaged community. And so we want to respond, but this will require all of us. This is not going to be a top-down effort. This is not going to be, we don't have those kind of resources. We do have a commitment, and we are happy to partner with those of you in the community who want to be involved in this, but we really do need to have all of us in this together. So it's going to take all of us to move this forward. So how can you help? How can you get involved? Well, there are a number of ways that we've identified, and I'm sure there'll be others that you have ideas about.
Hold on, baby. I'm in the middle of a really big thing.
Corinne, you're not muted.
Oh. Sorry.
Okay. So how to get involved? You can volunteer to help plan the summer event. You can volunteer to be part of the Police Community Relations Board. You can volunteer to support the recruiting interviews process. You can then participate in the Ask an Officer conversations. You can participate in the conversation on response. You can participate in all of the things that will evolve out of the conversations. So we invite you, we want you to be part of this with us. We are responding to what you've told us, so therefore we need to do this together. So what I would say is your next step would be, if you want to get involved, send an email detailing your willingness to help, what you want to be involved with, to community@peterborough.nh.gov. And when I hear from all of you, then we'll begin to organize around what we've structured here, what we've listed, and what based on how many people we have who want to get involved. So that's where we are. And now we come to the part of the presentation where you get to ask your questions and make comments. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and thank you for bearing with us all the way through that. And I'm going to turn it over to Nicole at this point to manage questions, and we will all answer. Chiefs are here to answer any questions you have, and let's go to that.
Okay, so first question we have comes from Zach Green. Okay, Zach, you're unmuted.
Okay, hi. Thank you for the presentation and kicking us off and getting back to us. I have a lot of questions, and I'm sure everyone does, so I'll try to be quick. But I want to follow up to my question to Chief Gennard from our first meeting, which was from where you sit, from seeing all these vigils, from seeing the march to the police department 2 weekends ago. Where are you sitting with all this? How are you feeling about all this? How does it feel when you hear the country and this town and the state roar for defunding and reallocating? I really want to hear from you, just sort of off the cuff, right in this moment, what you're feeling and thinking.
Okay. Looking at it nationwide, it's disheartening. And I certainly don't approve of the actions of the officers that are in question. As far as the vigils and the march, I completely support those. In fact, I spoke to at the end of the march a couple of weeks ago. As far as defunding, I'm not entirely supportive of that at the present time, but let me explain that. My approach to that would be, let's look at the police department, the community, as Karen has outlined, where issues are. If we have specific issues that are tied back to the police department that can be better served another way, that's the time to begin moving down that pathway, my opinion. Does that answer your question, Zach? Or?
I think that begins to get at it, yes. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, just a reminder everyone to please use the raise your hand function. That'll move you up to the top of my list. That way I'll be able to unmute you. Okay, Sarah.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Chief Gennard.
Hello.
I guess my question, I hear you, Chief Gennard, when you're saying that when you were referencing talking about that you understood that there were some times where citizens have perceived an officer to have acted in a way that didn't jive with them, and that it usually could be cleared up by a further conversation. But I guess I kind of want to ask you if there's a possibility. I just don't feel like you left any room for possibility that an officer could handle something badly, and that we could just acknowledge that, because some of the stories I heard the last time we were all here in these tiles, and like I feel my heart racing a little asking you this, because I don't want you to feel like I'm attacking you, but I feel really disappointed with the way you couched that, because some of those things we heard were really alarming to me, not in the sense that like, oh, we need to burn it all down, but like, can we talk about that officers may make bad choices sometimes? And I feel like I appreciate that I know that you flat out condemn what the officers did in Minneapolis, but there's a larger narrative in this country, and I know that you're aware of it, and everybody here probably is too, where this is happening over and over. So I have no doubt in your intentions, but I wonder if there can be a frank acknowledgement of that. Sometimes even Peterborough officers can do things that are not going to be okay, and that you may have to get involved and, beyond just a conversation that's going to show that a citizen was just getting it wrong. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to stop talking now, but
Okay.
I want acknowledgement of that could happen.
Yes, you're absolutely correct, Sarah. And I did not mean to mislead you or anybody else by making that statement. We're human too. We make mistakes. I acknowledge that. Okay? If we make a mistake and it's substantiated, I expect it to be addressed, and I expect we will learn from it. Okay? Does that help? Or?
Absolutely. It's really even not about this moment so much as just the longer process you and Karen are rolling out.
Okay.
I mean, I knew what you would say, and I know that you're in this to talk about it and to figure this out with your community. I just think it's something that I hope you'll carry forward.
I assure you of that.
Yeah, I know you will, but we're here, so I'm going to say it anyway. But I hope that can just be acknowledged, that we really are all human. I know that all the police officers in our town are human, and in all the town, but I just want to be able to acknowledge that it cannot just be a citizen that perceived something wrong, but that there could be something that an officer could have done better.
You're absolutely correct about that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Just a reminder, anyone who wants to ask a question or make a comment, please use the raise your hand function. All right. Anna McInnes?
Hi. I just wanted to say I really appreciate the presentation and the plan you guys have outlined, but I have some concerns about some of the action items, specifically increased bike, or the reintroduction, I guess, of bike patrols and foot patrols, and some of the things about hiring new officers. We've had a lot of discussion in this town, and a lot of people who seem to be supporting defunding the police. We are talking about less policing, having less police presence in our neighborhoods, and it seems to me that, you know, having police on foot, having police on bikes, hiring new police officers, a lot of that framing and that discussion alludes to an increased police presence, whereas a lot of people are asking for less police presence in their lives. You know, we don't want to have police as a direct presence. I guess, if that if that makes sense, sort of the question that I'm asking, why you chose to frame those as action items as opposed to ones that are more about less police, I guess. you know, because a lot of demands made in the last meeting were about increased public health, increased social work, increased education, whereas it seems that a lot of those action items were about more police. So I'm wondering about that choice.
Okay. Do you want me to answer that question, or?
Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. When Karen spoke about the hiring process, that does not mean adding more police. What we're referring to there is, as police officers move on, whether it be through retirement or resignation, and the time comes to fill that position, we would include the residents in that process. In terms of bicycle and foot patrol, that's just a mechanism that's done in many different agencies to improve connection between police and the citizens.
Right. I
Does
mean,
that answer your
that's what
question,
we were
Amy?
going for.
Right.
Yeah.
It's to help create that bond.
Okay. All right, Tina?
Yeah, hi everybody. These sessions have been so great. I've really appreciated them all across the board, so thank you. I just wanted to riff a little bit on what Sarah shared, and that is, I have to be really honest. The first paragraph or so of Chief Gennard's open really halted me, because it felt like we were just saying that it's the citizens who are misinterpreting the actions of the police. So I just wanted to share with you that that struck me equally strongly. And I think it's really important, and I'm a writer, so words like that really matter. So I just want to be sure that we are all sharing that we all have responsibility. There's no right, there's no wrong. we really need to communicate with each other on a really positive and open kind of a framework. So I loved your response, Chief Gennard. I think, I completely believe what you were saying. I just needed to share that I was really quite halted by the way it was said as an opening.
Understood.
Yeah.
Chief, I'm wondering if you might say a few words about the particular cases that people raised last time and the work that you did to look into those and what steps you've taken around those. Because I think that kind of goes to you hadn't talked about that at all tonight, and I thought you were going to.
I hadn't. I reached out. Let's see if I can keep these straight now. The young lady that was in the park, Emma, and I'm drawing a blank on her last name. I sent out an email to what she had described to all department members. One officer did, all of the officers responded, but there was an officer on that given evening who was in the park in plain clothes. Around that time, it was sometime in 2018, we were experiencing a lot of vandalism taking place in the park. The Adirondack chairs were being thrown into the river, they were being damaged, plants were being pulled up. So on a given evening, when it was relatively quiet, that officer spoke to there were two officers on duty, and it was agreed that one of them would be in plain clothes with a radio and his ID and watch for what were then juveniles, we believe, that were creating this mess and damaging all of the property. The young lady, Emma, he believes made eye contact with him and began running, which he pulled at police and she stopped. He held out his badge. She questioned whether or not he was a real police officer. By then, he had already radioed the second officer. The second officer came down and didn't just drive by, stopped, and the three of them engaged in conversation. The officer in plain clothes then took out his ID and his driver's license, held it up so that she could see it. At no time did he, according to the officer, at no time did he interrogate her or ask her for ID. He recognized her as a resident from 39 Grove Street, saw that she was not a juvenile, believed her version, she was out for a walk, and they engaged in small talk and went their ways. So painted somewhat of a different picture of what happened there.
So that's interesting because it's, as you and I spoke about, each person had the experience they had in that incident, depending on what body you were in that night, right? Your experience of that was different. And I think that goes to Sarah's point about, and your point earlier about perception and the way, right? So that's why it's important to actually kind of get the background information on some of these incidents so that we can learn from them and do better.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But again, that comes back to perception too. The young lady didn't know he was a police officer, so she was frightened. But his purpose for being there was legitimate, and it was not to be there to frighten or alarm her.
Yeah.
So, a second incident, it was in the new municipal lot where it was Mr. Gomez who spoke about being asked if he was making a video. What happened then, on that given evening, two officers responded down there to take a report from a gentleman who was reporting that his vehicle was stolen. Now, as it turns out, that vehicle, minutes earlier, had crashed in the town of Wilton, and a person was seen fleeing the scene. When the officers got there, he not only was he the owner, but he fit the physical description from what witnesses had described to the Wilton officer. He was also intoxicated. So through conversation and talking back and forth with the Wilton Police Department, they established probable cause to arrest this person for false report of a crime and drunk driving. In the midst of that, the gentleman who made the complaint approached both officers with 3 or 4 other people and began their videoing. The police officers didn't have a problem with that. They simply told him, please keep your distance and don't interfere. If you want to video us, you can do that. Once they took the gentleman into custody and were placing him into the car, the gentleman that they were arresting became very upset that they were videotaping him, or video and audio recording him, and began to yell at the group of young men. So the officers then had to tell them to please leave the area. He does not want to be recorded. So again, a slightly different version from what was described there.
Thank you, Chief.
Okay.
All right. Ivor and Brianna.
Hi, everyone. I also wanted to share my thanks for this follow-up session and for the plans in place. And it's just really nice to see that action is being taken. A special thanks to you, Chief Kennard. I personally had the opportunity to speak to you, and I have found you to be, have your listening ears on, as my 7-year-old would say. And I just want to encourage the continued action on the private front. I think it's, of course, appropriate to participate in the governor's commission. But the governor was also quoted as saying he doesn't believe systemic racism is here in New Hampshire, which is, of course, not only wrong, but dangerous. And so I just think, to echo, I think, I won't try to attribute it, I forget who it was on the last call, but they said that Peterborough really has a chance to be a leader now and lead the state. And after tonight, I really feel like we do have that chance. And I hope that, you know, all citizens who are here continue to participate and to hold everyone accountable, and that, yeah, just again, to thank the select men and women and the chiefs as well for your action. It is being noticed.
Thank you. Okay, Angela Papp.
Hi, I also want to thank you for your accessibility and transparency. My question is about how police officers spend their time. So I really have no idea. Like when someone clocks in for their shift, I'm curious how much is they sit in the station and wait for calls, how much is they're out kind of, you know, driving around looking to see if there's anything going on. Is there certain times like at midnight, we're going to go downtown? So I'm just really curious about kind of what a shift looks like for a police officer and how they spend their time.
All right, I'll start with a day shift. Typical day shifts begin obviously in the morning. We do 10-hour shifts here. So they work 4 days on, 3 days off. At the beginning of their shift, they're required to get dressed, get their equipment put together, but they're required to read the log and going back until the last time that they worked. So they know what incidents have taken place, what other officers have responded to. And it gives them a little bit of background. From there, they get a cruiser ready. They may have reports to do. So there's a lot of discretion there on their part. On the day shift, they can either begin to type reports, and they spend a tremendous amount of time in here typing reports. As Nicole could allude to, through a 91A request, I've had to provide her with a lot of reports, and they're pretty in-depth, so they spend a lot of time writing reports. If they're caught up on reports, they're required to do 2 30-minute, what we call stationary patrols. And we have a running list of where people have requested us to run radar. So they'll pick 2 spots off of that list, and they'll do 30 minutes in one location, 30 in another. We also patrol the town of Sharon. So that if time permits, they can do 30 minutes over there. We encourage them, particularly during the days when people are away from their homes and at work, to get into the neighborhoods and be visible in the neighborhood as a crime deterrent. We also do vacant property checks. So if you take a vacation for 5 days, you can call in here and make a request where we will check your house daily while you're away on vacation. Again, that acts as a crime deterrent. And doing that over the years, we've seen our burglary rate, residential burglary rates, drop significantly. In fact, other towns are beginning to follow through with that same practice that we've been doing for many, many years. They answer calls as they come in. The town is broken up into two sectors, the north and the south. Each officer is assigned to their own sector. There are times when both officers are needed in one area, traffic accident or domestic violence incident, that sort of thing. They're required to type up their own log entries, their own reports. So there's a lot that they do there on the day shift. The evening shift, much the same, but instead of being primarily in the neighborhoods when people are now at home, we keep an eye on the businesses. So they're in behind the plazas, checking the businesses, spotlighting the doors, and again, watching for people who don't belong back there or in a closed business, and the business owners have asked us to do that. The midnight shift is much the same, keeping an eye on the businesses, primarily patrolling and answering calls, although there are fewer calls in the midnight shift. But what we have found is the more serious calls seem to come in on the midnight shifts, dealing with the intoxicated people, the drug overdoses, responding to the emergency room for people that are out of control as well. It's kind of a thumbnail sketch. There are a lot of other little things that they do, but does that answer your question on that?
Yeah, thank you. And one follow-up question. About how many calls do you get a day into the police station?
It averages out over a 24-hour window. When you look at our totals at the end of the year, it averages about 25 per 24-hour window. Now, the bulk of those could come in during the day shift. The bulk could come in during the evening shift. We literally don't know from 1 minute to the next what we're going to be receiving for a call request. Okay.
Okay, Carolyn Riffle.
Hi. Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for hosting this and for your presentation. I definitely have a couple comments that echo some of what's already been said. First among them, that a lot of the proposed actions definitely focus on individuals and individual relationships between police and community members. And I understand how that does appear like part of a solution, but I'd also like to point out that for all of the good intentions that I do believe officers in this town have, that doesn't change like the fact of systemic policing and its role in our communities, which, I mean, you guys have acknowledged systemic racism and how it's a structural issue. And, you know, every good relationship that an officer might have with a community member doesn't really mean anything when an officer comes into contact with somebody who isn't a community member, who they aren't familiar with, who works during the Go Ask an Officer session, you know what I mean? And especially considering that our community is so white and that people who are not white and visit this town, I mean, like how does a relationship between us and an officer help them in that encounter? And I think that that sort of situation, why myself and others have been calling for defunding and restructuring, if not looking for alternatives to policing, and rather than increasing encounters between police and community members or police and others. I'm talking right now. Sorry, my mom walked in.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Opening windows.
Yeah, and kind of to continue on that point, I'd like to ask what sort of things you, Chief Gennard, and others might be doing to discourage community reliance on police for issues that don't really need a police response. I mean, I read the police log, and I know that a lot of calls that you get end up being, you know, shooing someone's cat out of the hospital, or, you know what I mean? And I understand that you have to respond to those calls because that's your job and what you're paid to do. But I also think that like just creating interactions between police and community members, regardless of the intentions of anyone involved, are hostile. And a lot of people fear police because they don't, not just because they don't know them as individuals, but because police as an institution and a system in this country are terrifying for many. So I don't know, I'd just like to ask that. And then I'd also like to ask, I looked up briefly Brandon Lee and his community conscious policing book and trainings, and it looked interesting, but didn't mention de-escalation or de-arming or reducing the stakes and the life or death nature of interactions between police and community members. So I'd like to ask if that sort of training is anywhere in your current regimen or in your future one. Thanks.
You've asked a lot, so bear with me.
Good. And I talked fast, sorry.
Keep your questions straight here. In terms of connecting better, in terms of the police connecting better with the residents, how is that going to help somebody from outside of the community? I don't know the answer to that. It probably wouldn't. We would need that opportunity to connect with that person. So we really have no control over who comes into the community. So that's a difficult question to answer. Another question you had asked, I've kind of lost track of your questions.
You had talked about de-escalation.
Okay, de-escalation training. Yes,
Yeah.
Brandon, the training that I referred to that you alluded to does not include de-escalation training. That's absolutely correct. I'm hopeful that through the Governor's Commission to the recommendations that are being made to the Police Academy will include more training there. We're also going to be reaching out into the private sector for more training, not just with Mr. Lee, but for other areas that the Police Academy may not offer that we can find in the private sector.
Mm-hmm.
We have funds in our budget for that purpose.
Okay. And then the last thing I'd asked about is about trying to avert people's reliance on police when it's not necessary, telling people who make calls that aren't necessary to just not do it, asking people who have reports to make to come in rather than to send officers to communities to just reduce contact and avoid these situations that are so negative for citizens.
We do that now. For instance, we've got people that will call us because 4-year-old little Johnny won't pay attention to house rules. Okay, so we may recommend to the parent that she speak to a pediatrician or a counselor. Okay, and that can be done over the telephone without having to send an officer out there. People who will call in wanting us to do something about we'll say a parenting plan. Parents that are separated. There's really nothing we can do there to help them. So we will refer them back to the court or their own legal counsel. So those things are already being done. We typically don't put somebody's dirty laundry in the police log, so you may not read about it in the newspaper.
Chief, Nicole, I'm gonna interrupt the flow here for a minute because the chat box is exploding. So Chief, we're gonna need to come back to the issue because people are upset.
Well, can I just say one thing about the chat box? One of the challenges that we have with the group chat, people using the chat in Zoom feature, is that not everyone is participating in the Zoom who is watching this meeting. Some people are watching it over Comcast Channel 22, or they're watching it over Ustream, or they're watching it over Facebook, or they may be watching it at a later date because they're unable to join us now. So it's really important that if you have something that you want to have said or want to contribute, please raise your hand, participate in the conversation. Don't just type it into the group chat, because honestly, it's going by so fast that even if I wanted or was able to, I'm not going to be able to read out all the questions and comments. So if you could please just use the raise your hand function, that'll help us be able to get to you and make sure that you're heard. Sorry, Karen.
That's okay. Yep. So so thank you for doing that, because that's important to note because it's not going to follow this video. So there's upset happening on the chat. So what I'd like to do is ask folks who want to speak to that so that we can deal with it up front instead of taking just random questions at this point. So I know I've seen Sarah wants to speak to it. So Sarah, can we unmute Sarah?
Yep.
Thank you.
Hi. So this isn't necessarily for Chief Kennard. This is also for Karen and Nicole. I just am kind of completely gobsmacked at what we just did. We just took 2 of our citizens who put themselves in their most vulnerable position and we just shut them down unilaterally. And this is not directed just at Chief Kennard, because there's other people who are managing this chat. And we just discredited and disbelieved people who had something to say and made themselves vulnerable. And I feel very upset about it right now. And I know other people do too. And I'm pissed off that I'm the only one who was called on. Aren't there other people who are upset about this? Where are your hands? This is not just about white privilege. This is about what we just did in this conversation, which is discredited and disbelieved two of our citizens who came to us at the last meeting at their most vulnerable. I cannot believe that we just blew past it and let it happen. I'm gonna mute myself now. I'm completely gobsmacked, and I hope other citizens are gonna say something right now.
So Sarah, I just want to thank you for that. And we're not blowing past it. We're going to address it. So here we are. And I apologize if what happened, the way it happened, because
they left the meeting. They have left the meeting. They're not hearing this because that's what they felt. So I just want everybody here to sit with that. They're not a part of this conversation now. Now I really will mute myself. I'm muted.
Thank you. Thank you. So thank you. So we are a community, and this is messy, and we are doing the best we can trying to figure out how to have this conversation, and we can't be together physically. So that's a challenge. And I apologize if something I did lent itself to them feeling unsafe and unheard. What I was asking Chief to do was just to speak to some of the research and the looking into things. I didn't expect that we were going to get into the details so much, but we did. And what I would hope that we could do is, Chief, follow up with the folks who are upset to see if we can have a chance to have a real conversation with them about this, because I don't know what else we can do if they've left this conversation. So would you work with me on that to reach out?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, so we will do that. I hope that that helps, but I don't know what else we can do right now since they've left.
That was Eddie Gomez and Emma Shapiro-Weiss, by the way.
Yes, very aware. Thank you. We'll take care of it. Okay. Thank you. And if anybody else wants to comment, go ahead.
I do. Yeah, I don't think that that is enough. I think that what's happening now is that people right here are upset about it. And it seems certainly to me like this is exactly an example of the kind of treatment that needs to be unearthed and addressed and changed. And to just say, oh, we will do this with Emma and Eddie later is not getting to the point of why so many of us are here tonight. And that is to have these real conversations right now.
So Dory, can you say more about, I hear you and I agree that this is it, right? We're having this, I get it. So I want to hear how do we do better than we're going to just follow up? Like, what would be the action? What would be, I'm learning, I don't know. Tell me, like, if you know what we should do next with this, please somebody say what we should do, because I don't know what that is.
So I can just tell you what, for me, it would be taking responsibility. It would be saying, you know what, the way I said that totally discredited what these two really amazing residents in our town have said, and we believe them. And so and then I guess for the moderators to kind of be listening for that and to be calling it out when it happens. So those would be two things that just come up for me now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Virgo Batty, and I would just like to say that I'm also really disgusted by what just happened and the way in which, rather than taking this moment as a community and Sheriff Kennard, instead of listening to what those vulnerable members of our community had to say and taking accountability for the missteps that police officers made in those situations, What effectively you did instead was gaslight them. You discredited everything that you said. Everything that they said was completely discredited by what you said. So what you should be doing is taking accountability. You shouldn't be putting the blame back on community members. You shouldn't be blaming them for what happened and defending your officers. You should be taking accountability. And I think that the action steps that you've outlined don't go anywhere close to reaching the kind of change that we're asking for. We're not asking for, you know, really deep connections with police officers. We're not asking for a barbecue. We're asking for change so that stuff like this doesn't happen to our vulnerable community members anymore. It's unacceptable. So rather than taking your time in this very important community conversation to gaslight people, take accountability. Take accountability. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Nicole, if I may.
Yes.
Okay. The intent was not to discredit anybody. I was asked the question, and my response was what I was told by the officers. I'm not sure what more can I do there. Simply discredit the officers? It's just getting the facts out as they were explained to me.
Right, but what you're doing in that scenario is you're only listening to the officers. I feel like you didn't listen to what those community members had to say in their experiences.
No, with all due respect, I have to disagree with you on that. I took the time to put an email out explaining to the officers what we were told at the listening session. I was looking for input and clarification. That's what came back to me. Okay? It was never my intent to discredit these people at all.
Right, it might not have been your intention to discredit them, but what you did was discredit them. And I think that you need to take the time to acknowledge that you did discredit them. You just saying that wasn't my intention removes all responsibility from yourself. So you need to take responsibility for the fact that you did discredit them, even if that wasn't your intention.
If there are those who feel that I discredited them, I apologize for that sincerely. But again, I'm simply trying to explain what I was told by the officers when the officers were questioned.
Thank you, Chief. Okay. Nicole?
Yeah.
Is it okay?
Esther?
Hi, thanks so much. My name is Esther Robes, and I'm a resident of Peterborough. And I have been part of this conversation in the one 2 weeks ago as well. And so thank you very much for everybody for putting this together. What I want to see, and what I hope that you've already done, is reached out individually to not only to the officers involved in the situations that were explained and the stories that were spoken 2 weeks ago, but I would hope that you've already reached out to the people who shared their stories with the community here. That's what needs to be done. That's all.
Thanks, Esther.
Okay. Alexa?
Hi there. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. So, I guess I'm Julie Bonby, so I'm not Alexa. Sorry. Alexa Zoom did the technology for me. And I too was present at the meeting a couple of weeks ago. I'm listening and I've been reading the chat window here. And I think my interpretation of Chief Gennard responding to the individual events, I guess I'm missing the perception everyone else did. And I guess that leads to the action steps that have been laid out. It's really hard to go back and get specifics about what happened a year and a half, 2 years ago, but to have those steps forward so that you can prevent, two different opinions, it's really hard. And I think it's unfair to Chief Gennard. I think it's unfair to everyone here. So, you know, I mean, let's move forward. You have action steps there. You have a vehicle in place that if something like that happens, it can be addressed in a timely manner. It's really unfair to think that Chief Gennard is going to interview officers on an event that happened a year, 2 years ago, and then come in and just say, hey, and throw his officers under the bus. So, let's move forward. I mean, I think, the chat is blowing up, and certainly no one was, I didn't get the opinion that Chief Gennard was here to offend anybody, but put action steps in place. And I think the action items I've seen today keep open dialogue. Everybody's human. For anyone to think that a police officer is not a human being and can make mistakes, that doesn't happen, okay? So you know what, mistakes made, great. You know what, move forward, put action items in place. And I think action items have been laid out. Communicate, open dialogue, communicate, and we will move forward. But I think it's really unfair for the interpretation that everyone is having. I did not have that same perception. So anyway, thank you.
All right, Kate?
I just go back to that word discredited because I used it in the chat. It's like, this is where we have a lot of work to do in terms of the kinds of conversations that we're going to have. Like when you don't intend to discredit somebody, and yet the effect of this public moment that happened for Eddie and Emma is that their story was effectively discredited by another story, and that they were not prepared for that to happen. This was, if I'm sitting right there, I'd be like, whoa, I didn't know that was going to happen, that I was going to hear about Chief Gennard's conversation with the plainclothesman and the other policemen and so forth, or Eddie's experience. And it's just like, yeah, I would be out of there. It's a terrible power differential, honestly, in this very public situation. And whether it's intended or not, we've got white, older, it's safe to say, male for the most part, officers in uniform. That's a piece of power. 3 of them in the parking lot or so, if I'm right, in Emma's incident, and then 4 with Eddie's, and then they're each a person of color, having to sort of say, no, my story was true, in this situation. It's like, it's really just a terrible sort of power dynamic. And I kind of understand how it happened, because you were asked to, say, process some of the, like, what happened after you heard those stories 2 weeks ago, and so you, in good faith, were trying to give the update on that. But the effect was something pretty awful, honestly, in terms of anti-racism work. Again, it's not like who's a racist or not a racist. It's like, that is not an anti-racist moment that we just lived through by any means. And so it just says, okay, we see where our baseline is in some of this. But again, I'm with Sarah. You can't just say this didn't happen. It happened. It happened right here in real time. And yeah, Eddie and Emma are both visible, active people in our community, and, as Sarah says, citizens. And ironically, Eddie makes videos for the town. He makes promo videos for Peterborough. So he was doing his camera work, and I don't know, the whole thing is just like, oh, not cool.
Okay. Sarah?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, like, I get people who are talking and directing this at Chief Gennard alone, but I think that this goes towards the larger thing for Karen and Nicole and anybody who moderates this stuff in the future to think about. When we put out an opportunity for people to come forward with their experiences, and they come forward, and then live on camera, we're like, well, let's talk about your assessment of that, Chief. That doesn't fall completely on Chief Gennard. That falls on how this meeting is being conceived of, and it's just not okay. It's really like, I appreciate what some of the people have said to Chief Gennard, but I also would put this on Karen and Nicole. This was not, it wasn't right. And you drove some of it. And I know that neither of you meant to, but like, may we all bear witness to this and not freaking do this. We have to do better. It can't be that this is how we leave. It's just, and I know you know this, it's just, it never should have happened. And it's something that is going to take work to be, I don't know if it's fixable, honestly. I hope we keep having these conversations, because I think that only time and being open to back and forth, I think that is our best way to move forward with this. And I really hope that Chief Gennard, that you will reach out to them and just talk to them, like them one-on-one, and not have to tell any of us as a community what that conversation was, because I think that would be something that would be important here. It's just so sad that they literally were so upset they left the meeting. And like Kate said, we have work to do, and it's not about calling each other racists or something. It's just not about that. It's just not. And it's just not about that. It's not about crapping on our police officers. It's about being mindful when we invite people to share their stories that are vulnerable. I don't know. And, there's obviously other stuff people have put out there for you guys to think about too. But I think that when you have a meeting like this, it's just needs better planning for sensitive topics.
I really want to jump in here real quick, because, and not to defend us or anything else, but I just want us all to be able to recognize that we're doing something that we've not done before. This is new. This is a new type of forum for us. This is a new type of conversation for us. This is a new type of process for us. So when we do our best, I think I can speak for the entire town staff, not just the administration department, the police department, or the selectmen, but all of the town of Peterborough works incredibly hard to be as responsive as we can to what our residents ask us. We try to answer questions. We try to put forward the information, in a way that, is as clear and as transparent as possible. And we're trying to be as responsive as we can to these, to the request to have these conversations, and to respond as quickly and as completely as possible to the information, to the questions that are put to us. So it's really hard. This is, again, all new, and we're doing the very best that we can. And we are going to stumble from time to time, inadvertently stumble. It's going to happen. But as has been said, we're all human. We're all doing our best. We're all really trying to work our way through this. It's a difficult process, and we're in the air, and, as people say, we're building the airplane as we're flying it, trying to make sure that we got the wheels on before we come in for a landing. So it's going to be a little tough, but we're really doing the best we can. And we certainly, would not want to drive anyone out of this conversation, particularly the people that helped to start it. That's absolutely not the intent. So,
and Nicole, I want to say this. I have no experience with this kind of thing. I wanted to be able to bring a conversation together, but I have facilitation experience, but this kind of topic is so, as Nicole said, we have not done this before. So what I would ask, if you have experience doing this, if you would be a better facilitator than if you could lend that to this conversation, if you're a member of this community and you are the person who knows that you could do this better than we're doing it, step up, because we're doing the best we can. I assure you, I'm devastated that I heard Eddie and Emma, that they're friends of mine. So that was so I'm going to have to go deal with that, and I will. But I would tell you something, we're doing everything we know how to do, and that everybody has different ideas about what would work better. I want to hear them. And if you think you can do this better, then give me a call and let's talk about it, and I'll create an environment where you can lead it. Because honestly, I want this to work. I want us to have conversations that move us forward. And if I'm not the person to facilitate it, I'm happy to step aside. But I need to know who else can do it. Because right now, this is the best we've got. So, so help me, help us, right? Some of you are really skilled at this, and if this is not my thing and it's your thing, then let me know.
I just want to add that this is all of our responsibility, and you are hosting this because you are the leaders that we have elected in our town. So whether it's not about who is better, who can handle this better, who's more equipped to do this better, it is incumbent upon all of us to do better. All of us to arm ourselves with information. All of us to listen to the way we're talking to each other. It's that simple. It's not, you know, reading a textbook on how to facilitate this discussion. We're here to listen. And I think there's a lot of defensiveness. We have to hear that too. There's a lot of defensiveness that's happening at this very moment. So I think we need to listen to that.
Thank you. Tyler, have a stand up.
Yeah. Tyler, you can, there you go.
Hi. I'd just like to add that this is brand new. This is just the tip of the iceberg discussing the police actions. We as a community have this ingrained in our systems. A lot of us are clueless. If anybody is on social media and hears what people say or reads the comments that are just so like they're missing the entire point of this, to say that, you know, oh, that happened 2 years ago, move on. If your life was threatened, you never forget that. That's not something you move on from 2 years ago, 10 years ago. It's ingrained in you. And so that's what we have to address as citizens with our neighbors. We have to, I'm learning, I have ways to go, but I want to bring other people with me in learning what are we doing wrong? What are we missing? What are we not paying enough attention to that we get defensive about something? Why not be open to the fact that we're not doing things right? So let's work on it. Don't tell people to forget about things. This, you know, clearly Eddie and Emma, it's unfortunate that they were called out and they're being the examples here. It pains me to think that they're being alienated with the courage that they showed a couple weeks ago. But we haven't heard the names of the officers mentioned that were involved with these incidents. And will they be spoken to again about this? And as someone mentioned, what protocols will we put in place to address concerns like this if there's a conflicting story such as we've just heard? I believe what Eddie and Emma felt, and this is concerning, and I'll leave it with that. But as a community, we need to talk to our neighbors who you know, drive their trucks with Confederate flags and are blatantly racist, but also the people that just brush it off like, oh, it's just a meaning of a word you're twisting around. It's not. It's affecting people deeply, and we've been pushing it off for too long. Now's the time. Now's the time.
Right.
Robin's had her hand up for a while.
Yep.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to say something different from what I was going to say because many people, Kate and Sarah and Esther, all said things that I would have said. The main thing I want to say is to agree with Zach Green that it's all of us, it's on all of us to move forward and work on this, all of us in the greater Monadnock area, all of us in New Hampshire, all of us in the United States, and most people who have remained in this Zoom are white, and we need to understand that we have privilege. So Kate talked about power differentials between the police and the ordinary citizen. I submit to you that there's another power differential that affects the way we breathe and live and walk in our communities and the way we perceive and experience things. And that is the power differential of white privilege versus what a Black person experiences every day. And that privilege gives us the power to define. And that is what happened tonight. White people, not because you were police, because it's out of white privilege. We have the power to define someone else's experience, even when they explained it in the most heart-wrenching, detailed way we can define away their experience. That is white privilege, and that is what we have to dismantle in order to move forward. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, Ivor and Brianna.
Thank you. I agree with what was just said, and I feel like I just want to say that I think we're here tonight, and we were here 2 weeks ago to ensure that Black people and people of color in our community feel safe. And feeling safe is an experience. And so I think the reason, or part of the reason, many folks are upset right now is, and you asked, what could we have done better? What Eddie and Emma need to hear is, I believe you. Your experience, how you experienced it, is true. And I think putting the chief on the spot to kind of, to answer to point, you know, what Chief said is not untrue for the officers. But to what was just said, it's a matter of white privilege. It's a matter of knowing that a lot of people want to hear things framed the way Chief framed them. And I don't use the word frame as in you were lying, Chief. Like I said, there's two sides of this, but that means that Emma and Eddie's side, or Doug, or other people who shared experience a couple weeks ago, their experience is true. And so we have to make sure that as we move forward, that we believe people, period. And there may be more to it that needs to individually be discussed or unraveled, but we have to believe first and foremost, and especially in a public forum like this, where it can come off a really bad way. And I think probably a lot of us will be moved to volunteer and participate moving forward now that we know the ways that we can do so. But we cannot have any elected official say, I don't know how to do it. It's on, if you want to represent the town, it's on you to learn how. And I don't say that to make anybody here more defensive at all. I say it to say, we're all here learning it together, and that includes all of you. And I know you're doing your best, and we're all doing our best. But the last thing I'll say is that for Black people and people of color, it's a little exhausting to hear that we white people are just waking up to this. Like, hey, sorry, we just realized this is happening. Holy crap, wow. We have to also hold some space for the fact that it's been happening to Black people and people of color for their entire lives. So the fact that we're waking up right now, that's on us. So we really shouldn't verbalize the, sorry, I'm just waking up. There's a lot of work to be done, and I think we can do it. I believe in this town. I believe in the people leading. I see change trying to be made. And when mistakes are made, let's just try not to defend ourselves. Let's try to say, I hear you, I believe you, and leave it at that.
Hey, Dory?
I guess I have two things. I know for me, when I think word choice is really important. When I heard the stories of that the officers told the chief, the way it was told to us was, this is what happened. And I heard that phrase, and it just kind of stopped me short. It's like, wait a minute, it's not what happened. It was stated like it was the fact, as opposed to, this is what the officers told me, this is what they remember. And yes, those are small differences in word choice, but they make a really big difference in communicating whether or not you believe somebody. So that was one thing that I wanted to say. And then the other is that, I mean, I am one of the white people that is starting to wake up now and seeing what I don't have to deal with every single day of my life. And this is going to be, is and is going to continue to be a hard process. And as much as we can, I mean, we're going to have to get comfortable with being really uncomfortable. That's just part of what we have to do right now. And I would say in this arena and in many other arenas, and as some of you know that I do a lot of work in climate, and that's another area where we're going to be getting really comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I guess to just, as much as we can, be open-minded and open-hearted to each other, because it is really hard and we are all trying to figure this out. And I clearly have, you know, strong opinions, and so do others, and it also won't work to shut other people down. So I think as much as we can, try to hold ourselves to the openness as much as we want other people to be open. So.
Esther? Esther, you may need to unmute yourself.
Yes, thanks. Hey again, I'm Esther, and a couple things I wanted to bring up, but I don't know if this is the right time, so I just kind of want to ask permission. I want to talk for a moment about some ideas and suggestions I have for further action steps that I'd like to see the town of Peterborough and the police department take. Is this an okay time to talk about that?
Karen shrugging and nodding yes.
Okay, I don't see her on my screen. Yeah. Thanks. So the first thing is I'd like to see the town of Peterborough have an anti-racist statement, and the police department have a statement on how they will be handling racism that goes along with a mission statement. It's separate, but I think both are very important in this, you know, coming in. And pardon me if there is already a mission statement from the police department. I haven't really looked for one, but I'd like to see one. I don't know if there's one about racism, but I'd like to see an anti-racist statement from the police department. And, you know, I have a bunch of ideas. Karen, I wrote you an email about some of these things. One other thing I'd like to bring up right now is there are different places in the nation who have already developed a model to address public concerns without the police department. And I'd like to see the town of Peterborough look into adopting a program like this. It could be working alongside the police department, which I think would be the most effective. Some of you may have heard of the Eugene, Oregon CAHOOTS program, which is the crisis assistant helping out on the streets. And a lot of different places in the nation have it, like Denver, Oakland, and Portland. And people who call the police department the dispatch will redirect the phone call to CAHOOTS, which then relies on trauma-informed de-escalation, harm reduction. It reduces police phone calls, and it also, our town doesn't necessarily have a bunch of these issues necessarily, but it does avert arrest and release repeat cycles. And I would like to see some more community action involved in supporting programs like this and other programs for our local community. And like Angela said 2 weeks ago, we can really be pioneering some of these programs and ideas moving forward. We can really be on the cutting edge, and we have an opportunity here to move forward with some of these really important steps forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Esther. I do want to just jump in here and say that the steps that we're talking about taking on the response theme have to do with what you're talking about, you know, really looking at our system of response and looking at how we could improve that, and talking with the folks in our community who are more expert at, you know, how do you respond to domestic violence and suicide and, you know, alcoholism and all the rest. And so that's really, I think, something we can definitely work toward, and we want to. And I think I was really just so pleased that Corinne stepped up with the library to talk to take on the conversations and the ongoing conversations, because you know, they've been having conversations on race for the last 2 years at the library, and Mary is trained in it, and I think that we do have good partners, and we do have, and I'm sorry if I was defensive before, this is really hard work. I'm human too, you know, and you know, but we have good people in this community, and really smart people and skilled people, and good partners. And so I think the ongoing conversations around anti-racism that the library is going to initiate and spearhead for us as a community will be the more finessed, the more well-managed, facilitated conversations with people who have more training in this topic. So I think that's a wonderful thing. And I think the other piece is we can figure out how to do. And I want to say, as a town leader, I'm not in any way shying away from my responsibility to lead. I really do honor having been elected, and I own it, and I know what my role is. And I wish I were better at it sometimes than I am. And I am really just waking up as well, and I'm just learning. So, but I think as a community, we have everything we need and this committed group of people to work on this together. And that gives me great hope. So I just want to, you know, just say that at this moment. Thank you.
Okay, Anna?
Yeah, I just wanted to, along the same lines as what Esther was talking about, reinforce something that I mentioned earlier, but maybe be a little firmer about it, which is that I know that I and a couple of other people are really not satisfied with the action items that I saw. I think that some of the issues that Karen just mentioned, you know, alcoholism, suicide, mental illness, those are urgent, really dramatic issues in our community. And they are not going to be solved by community conversations, by barbecues. They need to be solved with legislative action, by budgetary reforms, by really definitive action on the town level. I would like to see a plan come out from the select board. I would like to see the select board say, this is what we want to do. This is how we are going to do it. Here's a couple options for things we'd like to do. How do you guys feel about it? If we were to do this, there's all kinds of things, you know, different proposals that you could put out budget-wise, town level asks that could fix things like that we've been asking for: education, police, public health. And I didn't see anything about public health. I didn't see anything about education, and it was disappointing to me. So I just wanted to say that.
So Anna, I just want to respond, because I think where the public health conversation happens is in response in that area. And I too am very concerned and committed to that. I have my own personal story as a kid in a violent household. So I know I have a sense of what we need there, and I'm committed to that. And I think where that shows up is our ability to have a conversation about response and about what our community needs. And so I'd love to work with you on that, and we should talk further.
Hey, Zach?
I just want to piggyback on sort of what Anna was saying and related to budgets. NHPR just put out a report of all of the police departments, public safety, fire departments, and spending throughout the state. In Peterborough, as it breaks down, we are spending $264 per capita per person on policing and $0 on health. If we look at Peterborough's budget, we have $1.7 million allocated to the police, roughly, and about 600,000 allocated to our first responders, fire department, et cetera. So I think we really do need to have that conversation. That might not obviously be resolved in this very moment. I know that it won't. But I think that is a direction we need to really take a hard look at, and really start getting into those numbers and seeing how we can reallocate, because that is the discussion. That is part of the discussion.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more hands up.
All right, we're after 8, so we had planned to go till 8 o'clock, so I'm just taking a deep breath. I'm not sure where we go next. All right.
Can I just,
sorry.
I just want to thank you guys for putting yourselves out there to do this new, at least new for us, work. I think it takes courage, and so I appreciate that.
So I have a request. I know that we put the email out for things you want to volunteer for. I would love to have a core group of citizens, of people in this community who want to work on this. You know, we set out an action plan. Some things are you love, some things you don't love, but I would love also to have more conversation about the plan, and see what we can do better around that. So if you're wanting to work with me as a, so Nicole, can you in the chat put community email, please? So if you want to work with me on this and you want to be part of this planning conversation, let me know that, and let's have that be the next step, because I think, you know, we gave you our best thinking, and clearly you have other ideas and want to make some things better and change things, and that's okay. But let's do that next. Let's see if we can make the plan better, and then let's see what the next steps out of that are. But I'd be happy for a group to form and to have that deeper conversation together around the plan. Does that sound like, just give me a thumbs up if that sounds like a good next step, because I don't know what else I can offer at this point. Okay, great. Okay, let's do that. And then we'll, and then once that group has met, we can reconvene and feedback to the community what else we came up with. How's that? Okay, I'm seeing thumbs up.
Can I just make an ask real quick? Some of the communication on this meeting tonight was a little buried in the Peterborough Facebook group, or sorry, in the Town of Peterborough, New Hampshire Facebook group. I know some people had trouble finding it, and that's not anyone's fault. It's literally the algorithm and just how it moves things around. So I guess you could put your heads together and kind of think of the best way to channel these communications so that everyone knows that they're happening. It can be a more robust experience for all of us.
Yeah, okay, that would be fine too. I think the more brains we have working on that together, the better.
Thank you, Karen.
You're welcome, thank you. And I will just say thank you all for your willingness to have these hard conversations tonight. I am convinced more than ever that this is an amazing community filled with deeply passionate and caring humans, and I'm honored to be among you. And I promise that I'll clean up whatever mess I made tonight, because that's has to happen. And I just want to let you know that I love and appreciate all of you for being part of this with all of us, and let's go forward. And anyone else have a last comment before we end for the evening? Okay, then bid you all a good evening, and we will see each other again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.